Every evening for 14 months, Kevin traveled with a change of clothes, his black bag of medications, and his weary body to secure a sleeping mat and a spot on the floor within a Valparaiso church building. Next to him, there could be anywhere from 10 to 24 other men who were strangers to him, but who were also clients of the New Creation Day Center. Kevin's diabetes now required regular insulin shots and became a safety liability for him as a long-distance truck driver. Although he had tried his hand at other jobs for quite a while, even within the same company thanks to his boss, he was no longer able to pay for a roof over his head or a place to sleep at night. Kevin will tell you that this was not the plan he had for his life. That cannot be said of Jesus in today's gospel story as told by John. Jesus intentionally planned out this journey with 12 other men, taking them right into a territory long despised and avoided by most Jews. After traveling a distance into Samaria, Jesus needed some rest and a cool drink. He walked to the historic Jacob's Well, sent the disciples on ahead to find food, and he sat down to recuperate. The long, sordid history of Jews and Samaritans dated back hundreds of years at this time. Although they were ancestors and shared Mosaic law, the law of Moses, and they knew the first 5 books of the Bible, the Samaritans had intermarried and created a place of worship outside of Jerusalem. They celebrated Jewish feast days and were the closest relatives of the Jews, yet they were considered to be racially impure because of their liberal social and religious standards. Spending time with Samaritans and eating their food was not a thing a good Jew would choose to do. What was Jesus thinking? Had it been earlier in the day, the famous Jacob's Well would have been a crowded place where folks gathered and shared stories while getting their daily supply of household clean water. It was the highlight of daily rituals where conversations and interactions took place, sometimes even leading to matchmaking. We might think of it as meeting every morning with your neighbors for coffee before starting your day. Lots of sharing, but also lots of gossiping would also be occurring. But Jesus arrives at the well at noon, the hottest time of the day, when it would be quiet. And yet Jesus is about to have the longest individual conversation recorded in the New Testament. A woman, a lone Samaritan woman, carrying a water jar, approaches the well, and Jesus begins the conversation. He boldly asks her to give him a drink of water. It was a bold request because sharing a cup with a Samaritan would be considered unclean by Jewish standards, and it was taboo for a man to talk to a woman in public. This lone woman recognizes that Jesus is a Jew, maybe by the way he is dressed, or maybe by the way he has spoken to her. But now she wonders, who is this stranger? And so she replies back to him with a question. Why would a Jew like you, be asking a Samaritan woman like me for water? And Jesus replies to her. He announces that if you knew the gift of God and who it is asking for water, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. How can he get this living water without a bucket? And does he think he's greater than Jacob, who gave us this well, she thinks to herself? And then she voices that question. Jesus responds, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I give them will never be thirsty. The water that I give them will become in them a spring of water gushing up into eternal life. Now the woman who normally would be completely shunned by the likes of any other man like Jesus, is given the essence of his gospel message that later will cost his life to give. Confused by his words, but not wanting to have to fetch water again, she asks him to give her this living water. Jesus tells her, "Go get your husband and come back." Sometimes we find ourselves faced with a choice like hers. That will mean sharing our deepest hurt, our darkest truth about ourselves. It is to confess to the life we are really living and to become vulnerable about who we are within. Each of us sins and needs to be quenched with the living water Jesus offers her as we acknowledge our truth. Kevin, who gave me permission to share part of his story with you today, was privy to stories of homelessness by the men he traveled with from one church to another, or that he worked with in the New Creations resale shop. He wanted me to let you know that he noticed some things about the men like him who helped themselves find a door out of homelessness. He noticed that they were willing to admit the circumstances of their lives and were open to complying with the rules and plans of their case management. Plus, he noticed something else very significant. They wanted more of God's presence in their lives. They availed themselves of the Bible studies, worship, and prayer that was available to them in this Christian organization. They wanted to meet Jesus. What this Samaritan woman honestly reveals to Jesus is part of her story and what is terribly wrong with her life. She is at the well alone during the worst part of the day because she has no husband. Jesus reveals to her that he already knows her story, the story of 5 previous husbands, and that the man that she lives with now is not her husband to have. He commends her for telling the truth about her immoral life. How amazing this must have been for her not to receive the typical condemnation for what she has done and come to expect, but instead receive kindness and acceptance. Kevin told me one of the gifts he received in those months of sleeping each night in a different church is the respectful and kind conversations he had with church volunteers who made him feel valued. Those who either brought food, did intake, sat with him at a meal, or stayed overnight. Sometimes he would even get clean socks and water bottles to take with him the next day. He found strength even through the roughest time, including 2 heart attacks that he suffered during 2 nights sleeping at different churches. He shared with me that one volunteer never left his side during his first trip to the ER, and several volunteers he had met in the churches visited him during those hospital stays, including members of this congregation. Jesus is no longer just a stranger to this woman, but someone who respects and knows her, and she now recognizes him to be the prophet from God. Like most of us who want our opinions or worldviews valued, she was focused on the best place to worship because it was the longest standing wedge between the Jews and Samaritans, and it was important for her to know. And Jesus entertains her question, and he tells her that worship is not a place at all, but is actually a way to be with God. God is our Father, Jesus explained, and he wants worship in spirit and truth. Around the time that we were moving into this beautiful worship space at Christ Lutheran Church, many in this congregation were prayerfully asking God and discerning how he wanted us to grow and use this space that we have been given. Many volunteers have built these walls, and the desire was to dedicate it to his will for us. I even recall the congregational retreat with that as the focus. It has been about 6 years, or 6 spring to fall seasons, that we have given this building, our time, and our resources to men needing meals and housing in Porter County through New Creations. Today, we ask God to move us again to pray about this ministry and our individual part in it. On April 15th, the Saturday before Easter, we will again be hosting these men and opening up our doors to this ministry. Some of us will be called to sacrifice sleep and do a night shift or two in that 6-month season. Others of us will be listening ears to stories these men have to tell. Whether God puts in your heart to help with the intake process, or just donate a food or lunch item, or maybe do laundry once a month, this is the place where we meet our needy neighbor, and we are missionaries right here in Valparaiso. It is also the one place where we come together with other denominations and church bodies in this county and city to live out Jesus' call together to feed his sheep. When the woman at the well responds to Jesus after he tells her about the right way to worship God, she tells him that she knows Bible teachings about the Messiah that will come one day and explain everything. Because she knows God's promises, for the very first time to anyone, Jesus reveals to her his true identity, using the name of God known to the Samaritans and the Jews alike. He says, "I am Yahweh, who is speaking to you." And her response to this gift, she drops that water jar she is carrying and immediately goes to those who have not accepted her to share about Jesus so they can know him too. She is gushing with living water and is transformed into a messenger for God. Jesus transforms lives beyond the boundaries of gender, race, ethnic, cultural, religious, or economic status that man creates. The only thing we need to do is be willing to let him fill us with living water in our own lives and in our service to others.